We shall commence this module by discussing the growth of economy. Economic growth is quite modern phenomena. For instance, consider the growth rate of world leading industrial countries over the past 4 centuries. During the period 1580 to 1820, the Netherlands was the leading industrial nation. It experienced an average annual growth in real GDP per worker hour of roughly 0.2%. The United Kingdom, the other leading country, experienced an annual growth of 1.2% during the period approximately 1820 to 1890. Since 1890, the United States of America is considered to have usurped the leader's seat, and its average growth rate during the period 1890 to 1989 was a relatively dramatic 2.2% a year. Clearly, by today's standard, even the fastest growing economy 2 centuries ago would be considered practically stagnant. According to one estimate, even the modest 2% growth, a nation's per capita gross domestic product doubles in 35 years. It shows the enormous potential that economic growth carries if sustained. Economic growth is the increase in the market value of goods and services produced by an economy over time. It is conventionally calculated as the percent rate of increase in real GDP. In economics, economic growth theory typically refers to growth of potential output, that is production at full employment. As an area of study, economic growth generally distinguished from economic development. The former generally refers to the increase in per capita income, while the latter tries to focus on quantitative as well as the qualitative changes in nation's life. During the economic advancement, according to Kindleberger, economic growth means more output, while economic development implies both more output and changes in the technical and institutional arrangement by which it is produced and distributed. Growth not only involves more output derived from higher amounts of input, but also refers greater efficiency, that is an increase in output per unit of input. Development goes beyond this to imply changes in the composition of output and in the allocation of inputs by sectors. After studying this module, you shall be able to know about basics of economic growth, economic development, factors affecting economic growth. Learn about the difference between economic growth and economic development. Identify the role of natural resources, capital accumulation, technological progress, population, human capital in the process of economic growth. Evaluate the impact of economic growth, measurement of economic growth, indices to measure the economic development, and analyze the impact of economic growth on ordinary population, economic growth versus economic development. Let us now understand the difference between economic growth and economic development. Economic development can be referred as the quantitative and qualitative changes in the economy. Arthur Lewis defined economic development as enlargement of the range of people's choices. Economic development focuses on the spectrum of spheres ranging from health, education, employment, safety, environmental sustainability, social exclusion, gender empowerment, infrastructure, and other activities. Whereas economic growth measured in terms of rise in GDP or market productivity. Consequently, Amartya Sen refers economic growth as a one of the part of economic development. The study of economic development was born out of an extension to traditional economics that focused entirely on national product or the aggregate output of goods and services, the latter known as economic growth. Economic development mainly concerned in expansion of people's entitlement and their corresponding capabilities, morbidity, nourishment, literacy, education, and other socio-economic indicators. Economic growth, that is more income, is only one of the things desired by the poor people. Adequate nutrition, safe water, better medical facilities, more and more better schooling for their children, cheap transport, adequate shelter, continuing employment and secure livelihood and productive remunerative satisfying job do not show up in higher income per head. There are even other non-material benefits that are often more highly valued by poor people than the material benefits, but they do not reflect in higher income figure. For instance, freedom to choose, movement, speech, safe working conditions, expressing cultural, regional, linguistic and religious identity, empowerment are some factors often more important than income. It is quite often observed in many parts of the world that economic growth can be rapid without the improvement in quality of life. In other words, per capita increase in GDP only benefits a small section of minority population and rest of the vast majority of population is deprived from the fruits of increased GDP. It led to concentration of wealth in few hands, stark inequality, existence of dual economy, where one section enjoyed the increased production of goods and services and remaining large section of population starving and yet to receive any benefits of higher GDP. Economic growth set the prerequisite condition for economic development. The economic growth accompanied by proper distribution of resources across the population, building institutional mechanisms which ensure qualitative change in the lives of people and environmental sustainability guaranteed the economic development. It has been observed that there is a positive correlation between incomes per head and indicators of human development. It does not refer that higher income led higher development, since many countries have achieved high human development at low level of income. This correlation depends on how additional income from growth is being used for public education, health and employment opportunities. Economic is indeed important, not for itself, but for what it allows a country to do with the resources that are generated, expanding both individual incomes and the public revenue that can be used to meet the social commitments. Initial endowments like distribution of assets are also important factors in determining economic development. If land is fairly distributed among the population and education is accessible for masses, then the benefits of economic growth can easily percolate down to the end of the population. Economic growth is quite often considered to be an essential part of development, but growth known as continuing increase of the quantity of goods and services produced and consumed over time is simply the intertemporal dimension of any policy objective, although it has been wrongly monopolized by production and consumption. It should apply to poverty reduction, employment, investment, a more equitable income distribution, environment protection, leisure, and of course also to income. But once you specify for income, consumption and production, then what? To whom, by whom, for what and when, growth becomes the incidental result and not the objective of a sensible economic policy. Growth is too unspecified, abstract, aggregate and unbounded to be sensible objective of the policy. It also implies an infinite horizon without the limits to increases in income. What matters is the composition of national income, to what uses it is put, its distribution among the beneficiaries now and for the future generations, and with how much efforts and in what conditions it is produced. If and only if the extra resources resulting from growth go largely to the poor and if they are spent on public health and education, will a contribution to human development result? In measuring economic growth, the national income is a quite inadequate measure of human development for several reasons. It counts only goods and services that are exchanged for money, leaving out the account of large amount of work done inside family, mainly by the woman, and the work done voluntarily for children or older people or in communities. Public services are counted at their cost, so that doubling the wages of all public services appears to double their contribution to welfare or development. National income accounting does not distinguish between goods and the regrettable necessities like military expenditure or anti-crime expenditure, products needed to combat the bads. Addictive eating and drinking is counted twice. When the food and the alcohol are consumed and when large sums are spent on diet industry and on cures for alcoholism. Much of what is now counted as economic growth is really either combating evils and fixing the blunders and social decay from past, or borrowing resources from the future, or shifting functions from community and household to the market. One more dimension that is untouched in discussion of economic growth is related to the gender issues. In the events where women are provided opportunity to choose the size of their family, it has been found that without adverse economic and social consequences, smaller families are indeed chosen. With human development, through expanding education, especially for women and girls, the reduction in infant mortality, improved medical facilities led to significant fall in fertility rates among the women. There are strong evidences which show that more surviving children also led to reduction in population growth by evading uncertainties in the family. Human development is a powerful tool to curb the population growth, and reduced population growth open up the new ways of economic advancement. Sudhir Anand and Amartya Sen have suggested the division of all countries into three groups. These are low, medium and high level of human development. For countries with low level of human development, the basic human development index can be used to rank their performance. For countries with medium value of human development, Anand and Sen add one supplementary indicator to each of the three basic variables: life expectancy, literacy and the log of GDP per head. In the longevity category, they add infant and child mortality, which is under 5 child mortality. In the education category, they add the secondary school enrollment, and income category, they add the incidence of income poverty in the country. Now moving on to discuss the factors affecting economic growth. First is natural resources. The principal factor determining economic growth of a country is the natural resources. A country suffering from non-availability of natural resources would not be able to develop rapidly. Having said this, it is also a recognized fact that presence of abundant resources does not guarantee the economic growth. It must be accompanied by proper exploitation of these resources. If the existing resources are not properly utilized or exploited, the country would not be able to develop. One of the main factors which ensure the utilization of resources is technological advancement. Therefore, natural resources can be put in right place to augment economic growth through introducing improved technology. As pointed out by the economist, that the value of resources depend upon its usefulness, and the usefulness of resources mainly depend on accommodating and updating the technology, which can be used as a mean to define its usefulness. It is often said that economic growth could be achieved even when the economy is inadequate in natural resources. One such country is Japan, which is even deficient in natural resources, but one of the developed countries of the world because it has been succeeded in forming human capital and discover new uses of its limited resources. A country which is considered poor in resources in one point of time may consider rich in resources after passage of time, not because of new avenues of resources are discovered, but equally because creating new resources and using limited resources in a more efficient way. Moreover, by importing those resources from other countries, it has been able to overcome the inadequacy of natural resources through using the superior technology and efficient management skills. Thus, for economic growth, mere presence of abundant resources is not enough. What is essential is their proper exploitation through improved technology and efficient management skills, so there would be little wastage of scarce resources. The second component is that of capital accumulation. The second and most important factor in economic growth is of course capital accumulation. Capital means stock of physical reproducible factor of production. When the capital stock grows over a period of time, this is defined as capital accumulation. The process of capital accumulation is cumulative and self-sustaining provided three interrelated stages are preceded. Number one, the existence of continuous rise in savings. Number two, to use these savings for investment in capital goods. Number three, intermediaries to mobilize savings and divert them for investment. One of the prominent reasons of lower growth in underdeveloped countries is lower savings. Equally opposite in developed countries, higher savings ensure the capital formation and sustain continuous growth. Due to low propensity to save in least developed countries, voluntary savings are not sufficient to ensure the desired growth. Due to low level of income, poor countries are close to subsistence level of consumption, which led to low level of savings. In such circumstances, possibly to raise savings are dismal, and economic growth would rely on other sources of capital accumulation like external loans, grants or aid. Capital formation is the key component of economic growth. On the one hand, it ensures effective demand, while on the other hand, it creates productive efficiency for future production. Higher investment in capital goods and consumer goods industries creates employment opportunities, which led to higher consumption reflected in effective demand. On the other hand, new avenues for capital goods open up the ways for productive efficiency in production. The processes of capital accumulation reflect in higher national output, essential to meet the demand of increasing population. Third is technical progress. Technical progress or the technological changes are counted as the most important factor in the process of economic growth. They are mostly referred as the changes in mode of production through new technique which emerges out of research or innovation. Changes in technology lead to increase in productivity of labor, capital and other factors used in production. Schumpeter regards innovation as the most important technological factor in economic growth. Modern economic theories even assume that without technical progress, a country cannot sustain the growth in per capita income indefinitely. Due to low technical progress in the least developed countries, they are not able to break the vicious cycle of underdevelopment. Developed countries are succeeded in continuous adaptation of new technology due to higher spending in research and development activities. The fourth one is population. Population growth is also another important factor which affects the economic growth. There are evidences which show that population growth systematically changes with overall development of a society. The changes in population growth along with the development process normally are known as demographic transition. The idea is very simple. When the population growth is high, economy has to put more effort for achieving higher growth, since higher population pull down the per capita income growth and vice versa. A strong family planning targets or the provision of incentive to have less children, spread of education can pull down the population growth and permit the long run growth. After this, there are some other factors as well. One of the important factors determining modern economic growth is infrastructure development, such as means of transport and communication and the facilitating services. Structural changes are also important factors determining the shape of economic growth. It implies a transition from a traditional primary sector to the modern manufacturing sector and then to the service sector. Such structural changes should be accompanied by increasing employment opportunities, higher labor productivity and ever increasing stock of capital and institutional which promotes new ideas, innovations or research. Sign of structural changes begin with the transfer of population from the primary sector to the secondary sector and then to the tertiary sector. Creation of human capital is another important factor which determines the path of economic growth. The skilled labor force of various kinds such as scientists, engineers, managers, administrator, expert or various fields of social sciences etc. are crucial to form such institutions which create enough ground for economic growth. The shortage of such skilled labor force poses a serious problem in least developed countries. To overcome such deficiency in human capital, it requires setting up scientific, technological and various institutions which fill such gaps in human assets. Human endowments, the social attitudes, political conditions and historical factors greatly influence the process of growth. Therefore, social, cultural, political and administrative factors have its own importance in economic development. For instance, social attitudes, culture and values determine the spirit of adventure, discoveries, invention, which consequently led to new opportunity conducive to the economic growth. Now let us summarize what we have discussed in this module. We have discussed that economic growth is quite modern phenomena. Economic growth is the increase in the market value of goods and services produced by an economy over time. Economic development focuses on spectrum of spheres ranging from health, education, employment, safety, environmental sustainability, social exclusion, gender empowerment, infrastructure and other activities, whereas economic growth is measured in terms of rise in GDP or market productivity. A country suffering from non-availability of natural resources would not be able to develop rapidly. The process of capital accumulation is cumulative and self-sustaining, provided three interrelated stages are preceded. These are the existence of continuous rise in savings, to use these savings for investment in capital goods, and the intermediaries to mobilize saving and divert them for investment. Technological changes are mostly referring to the changes in mode of production through new technique which emerges out of research or innovation. There are evidences which show that population growth systematically changes with overall development of a society. The skilled labor force of various kinds such as scientists, engineers, managers, administrator, expert on various fields of social science, etc. are crucial to form such institutions which create enough ground for economic growth. That's all with this module.